Hello friends, very good morning and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our today's topic of discussion is Transdisciplinary Knowledge Systems, and this is the second part of our series or lecture, because one part of Transdisciplinary Knowledge System has already been covered in the previous lecture, and you could go back to it and view it as well. And for this discussion we have with us in our studio Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. He has been teaching for more than 13 years and his area of specialization is Ancient Indian History and History of Medicine, and a book authored by him with Jayata, published in 2013, is titled Indian History and Culture. And with this introduction I would like to welcome Sir to our studio. Thank you so much, Sir, for coming, and I request you to begin our today's lecture.
Thank you, Rushi. Good morning, viewers. We have already spoken about the transdisciplinary aspect of ancient knowledge systems in India in the earlier interaction that I had with you, and today's interaction is in continuance of what we discussed before. We have already spoken about the theoretical aspect of the transdisciplinarity and also the areas in which we can actually have a glimpse of the transdisciplinary aspect of knowledge systems, be it acquisition, be it knowledge formation, or even knowledge dissemination. And it is in that context that we had talked of several examples ranging from medicine, grammar, mathematics, and so forth. We have also seen that very mainstream knowledge treatises, very specialized corpus of literature, say medicine, having more than mere traces of mathematics, mainstream mathematics contained in it. Similarly, we have also spoken about the permeation of say mathematics or algorithm in Paninian grammar, and examples are many. Since they become little bit technical, therefore it perhaps won't be possible to elaborate the details part of such expositions contained in Panini's grammar, which is dated to around 5th century BC. And the way in which the words, sentences, phrases and the rules are framed, it presumes that there is fair degree of awareness or in fact usage, active usage of mathematical principles, algorithmic principles and so forth. Similarly, as we move on, we find such information which now this is something interesting that we should pause and think it over at this point of time. Generally, it is said that most of the ancient knowledge systems actually by default have to be transdisciplinary, because disciplines had not branched out from whatever constituted knowledge. So this is said with this kind of a hindsight, that division of labor or a specialization of disciplines or knowledge is something which is a byproduct of modernity, and it is only with the advent of modern researches that we tend to specialize in a particular aspect of knowledge systems. We define the subject matter, the content, and then we go on researching it with fair degree of exactitude and specialization. So generally it is believed that it is this particular branching out which leads to specialization of knowledge and information, and that's how modern disciplines are oriented or demarcated. And therefore, there is not much merit in claiming that ancient Indian knowledge systems were transdisciplinary, because until such disciplines branched out, basically the knowledge was a kind of combination of all and everything. But there is something to be looked at, particularly in the case of ancient Indian knowledge systems, because we are talking of a situation and we are picking up examples from the treatises, ancient treatises, which are by themselves specialized treatises. We are not talking of natural philosophy which contained everything, and therefore there is little bit of trace of say mathematics, or there is little bit of grammar, there is little bit of medicine, therapeutics and so forth. We are talking of very specialized, self-aware treatises which claimed that it is a treatise on a particular thing, say medicine, say grammar, say mathematics. And then within that we are seeing the presence of some principles which actually underlie the expositions in a different subject realm, a different realm altogether. So when we say that the principle of probability of the combination or combinatorics, the principle of combinatorics is very much implicit in Vagbhatta's treatise on medicine, which is dated to around 7th century AD, and similar kind of, in fact, the similar example, the same example is picked up by a treatise on mathematics, Bhaskar's Leelavati, which is dated to somewhere around 12th century AD. So separated by a period of say 500-600 years. And the example of how different rasas, or how different say savors, tastes combine to give a particular number of results. While talking about the combinatorics of 6 different elements and all possible outcomes, Bhaskar picks up example from the realm of medicine. And that is something which has already been spoken of 500, 600 years before in Vagbhatta's treatise on medicine. So we are not here talking of very loose kind of all-embracing natural philosophy, the way ancient wisdom existed in most cases. But here we are talking of very specialized treatises. Similarly, Panini's grammar is, as we said, that it is also dated to a period, say 5th century BC. And if there we find very sophisticated principles of algorithm and mathematics underlying the combinations possible so far as words and phrases are concerned, the grammar itself, and that is why Sanskrit and the grammar enunciated therein is considered to be computationally very friendly and very useful, because this principle of algorithm is something which underlies the computational principles used in the computer language as well. So some languages and the grammar on which these languages are weaved, they lend themselves particularly well so far as computer language is concerned, or computational aspect of such information is concerned. So that is something that we should be mindful of, and that critical assessment of the way in which different aspects of knowledge was weaved into one is dismissed as something that it had to be that way by default. That needs to be taken care of, and that is what we did just now. And over and above that, there is another aspect that in the last interaction we just touched upon, and maybe that I give you some concrete examples to substantiate as to what is actually meant by that. I did speak of some mnemonic devices. Now, mnemonic devices are like, suppose we have a cumbersome figure to remember, or we have some calculations to do. Now, if we directly give numbers and expect that people will remember it, then there is every likelihood that it might not work that way. But if we attach some stories or some conventional figures which is part of everyone's knowledge and which is part of everyday life, which is part of conventional say knowledge systems and so forth, then the information can be stored in public memory rather easily. So mnemonic devices are something that is resorted to. This principle of this craft of reducing things to some mnemonic units, and thereby presenting the entire number as a kind of story, or as a kind of set of different interesting literary, you can say, notations or references, makes it easy and interesting to remember across generations. And this is something which was extremely important in ancient India also from the point of view of culture, is because quite a few treatises that we now understand that it is a treatise, it is in written form available to us, but when they were actually composed, they existed, or they lived their life of their own composition in oral form, in what we say, Maukik Parampara. And it is the Shruti tradition by which people came to not only listen to it, but also internalize it and also remember it, and that's how it was passed across generations. We all know that when we write, and writing is an important development in the course of history, but how popular that could have been is something that we can always keep debating, particularly in the ancient context. And what was the chief form in which the knowledge was actually stored and transmitted across generations? We all are aware of the corpus of Vedic literature itself: Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda, the four iconic Vedas. In their own time of composition, say 1500 BC to 600 BC, when they were actually composed, this is not the time when they were actually penned down. So the people who listened to it, who recited it, who transmitted it, were all doing with the help of oral tradition. So it is through orality that the entire hymns contained in these four Vedas were transmitted across generations. Of course, while doing so, one required that these information should be presented in a way which could be sung together, which could becomes easy for people to remember. There is some kind of tukabandi, there is some kind of lyricism to it, and therefore the Samaved actually is basically, the content is not different, content is entirely that of Rigved, but it is arranged in metric form so that it can be read out easily, it can be remembered easily, and there is the sense of singing, or it will lend itself to singing rather easily. So that is how the Rigvedic hymns are modified, not in meaning, but just to lend it or just to make it make the reciter's task easy, so as to sing it and transmit it across generations. So this is what is mnemonic device, and I'll just cite you one example here. This is again from Sanskrit mnemonic for pi. We all know the value of pi, and this is something which has not been worked out in its absolute sense, in the sense that after decimal there are quite a few numbers which appear, and they don't recur either. So it's a challenge for those who deal with numbers and mathematicians and so forth, and perhaps it was a riddle to the ancient people also, but they were aware of it, and look how they are bringing elements from conventional wisdom, from culture, from the numbers associated with a particular animal, the conventional numbers associated with some incidents, some species, or for that matter our own organs, and that is how the value of pi, which is 3.14 and so on, that is how it is sought to be presented. Now, it is one thing to put down the actual number and leave it for the posterity to remember it, but just see the meaning contained in the words that I'll just read out, and how it needs to be decoded in order to arrive at the real intent of clubbing all these names and species and different phenomena together in one verse. Now, this is from Bhut Sankhya, where Sanskrit words are used to denote numbers. This is, of course, from ancient India. Words that had a connotation of numeric values were used together to form phrases that helped record and remember large numbers. Now, here the example, for instance, the word eye. Of course, we all know that we have two eyes, so it can be associated with the number 2. Similarly, tooth. So, since we have 32 teeth, therefore, tooth can stand for the number 32. It need not be taken literally. So, here it is standing for a particular number. And it is a prominent mathematician from the late 14th century from Kerala, Madhav, who is using this system to come up with some amazing value, which is very close, or which is close approximation to the value of pi. And here the words used are gods, eyes, elephants, serpents, fires, 3 qualities, Vedas, nakshatras, elephants, arms. And the approximation that is sought to be arrived at here is that the wise men have said that this is the measure of the circumference when the diameter of the circle is 9 nikharavas. Now, We all know that circumference divided by the diameter is something which takes us to the value of pi, and here the numbers, the words that I just said actually stand for, say there are 33 crore devas, gods, so that's the first word. 2 eyes, so the other word, the next word is for the number 2. Conventionally 8 elephants. Now they are picked up from the traditional number that is associated with these animals. There are traditionally again 8 serpents, 3 kinds of ritual fires. So fires actually stands for 3, the number 3. 3 gunas, the qualities. Gunas actually stand for the number 3. Vedas, all of us know that there are 4 Vedas, Rig Ved, Samved, Yajurved. So Vedas stand for 4, the number 4. Nakshatras stand for 27, because conventionally it is regarded that 27 is the number of nakshatras. And arms, we human beings have 2 arms, so arms stand for 2. So if we arrange these numbers from left to right in increasing order of their place value, then this number, the number that we arrive at is 2827,433,388,233. And since one Nikharva is equal to a particular value here, and then if we divide that 9 Nikharvas, so 900,000,000,000,000. So if the numerator is put at the top and this 9 Nikharvas as a denominator, then the value that we actually get is a very close approximation of pi, which is true to the first 11 decimal points. And this is again amazing. Now what I am trying to do here is not that ancient Indians knew about it all. But what I am saying is that the tradition and culture itself allowed the storage of such information and usage of the conventional numbers or the memory associated with a particular convention to be used in transmitting these information. I had already spoken of the combinatorics towards the beginning that is at display in the work of Vagbhat, where the actual theoretical underpinning is elaborated much later, 500-600 years later, in Bhaskara's Leelavati. Now, similarly, in several other texts, and something as away from say mathematics or grammar, we have the treatises on medicine. Now, here also, in order to present the system of combination, for instance, we have a fixed number of gunas, we have a fixed number of dosas, we have a fixed number of other properties associated with, say, a particular disease or the traits, the symptoms, or the possible outcomes. Now, if they have to be presented in a linked form, and please remember, if the compulsion is that the entire set of information merely have not to be written down and stored with a sense of finality for posterity, but the compulsion is also to present it in a way where people can actually remember it and can utter it, can pronounce it, can say this, and it becomes not only intelligible to others, of course coming from that culture and tradition, but it also gets transmitted across generations. So there we spoke of the mnemonic devices also at display exhibiting this transdisciplinarity is the use of synonyms. The root nouns and acting as say verbs. So the operational, the functionality of that phrase is reduced to doing something either in favor, or say it increases something or it decreases something. And here we have a plethora of synonyms, plethora of words presented in the words or some other form where it can be remembered through oral tradition. But actual functionality of the entire set of those words is just reduced to two, and that is either it increases or it decreases. I'll just cite one example here, and let's see. This is again from the treatise by Shushruta. While talking of what is good for health and what is not good for a particular trait, so it is positive, negative, and we will see as to what is its operationality or functionality. But the verbal nouns using different roots here is har, han, ghana, nashan, prashamana, prashnashana. Now these are the synonyms. These are the words. These are verbal nouns using different roots, but they are all used in the medical treatise. And when you read this, of course they are different words, but if we get down to the business of decoding it as to what it actually means in medicinal terms or in medical terms, what is its utility, then we find that it is relevant only for literary consideration, this plethora of words, but in operational terms, in therapeutic terms, it is reduced to just two things, and that is either some of them calm down something or it eliminates something altogether. So the nuanced meaning here is to kill, to destroy, to eliminate, to chase away, or to calm down. And it is this aspect of the verb which is sought to be communicated in medical terms. And one need not get into the nuanced meaning of the words used here. So it is like a garland of words which are used here, but in operative terms it gets reduced to either pushing up, pushing down, something which leads to increase or decrease of a particular trait or a particular melody or a particular solution which is given. So these are some of the things that we need to be aware of, and again this is symptomatic of a culture in ancient India where different aspects of knowledge, be it literature, be it grammar, be it mathematics, be it medicine, are freely encroached upon or are freely used to put across information and knowledge to the posterity, and all this is operating against the compulsion of making it fit, making it easy for people to remember. So the mnemonic devices are also a very important consideration. So literary padding, which is a characteristic feature of even technical treatises on ancient India, is something which generally, if we do a cursory reading of the text, generally we are put off. We tend to think that it is not very scientific, and look, different expressions which are actually of literary concern are actually getting into a medical treatise or a technical treatise, which is quite uncalled for and which perhaps makes it unscientific. Actually, that is not the case. The entry of these literary, say, either metaphors or even phrases or literary paddings, they are all resorted to with a purpose, and the purpose is to make it fit for oral transmission. And it is that which is important for us to understand, and that's why if we talk to all these things are becoming extinct nowadays, but if we talk to our grandparents' generation today, particularly in rural areas, we do find that oral tradition was something which was extremely important to them, and quite a few things of earthy wisdom. Say the tables, the number tables, which we generally remember for 1 to 10 multiplication. These people knew and these people remembered the multiplication tables even in fractions. So 1 into 1.5 and 2.5. So while multiplying something with 1, 2, 3, 4, not only that, but also by multiplying, also in the case of multiplying something by 1.5 and 2.5, 3.5, and that way. So the point is that these aspects were actually weaved in such a way, these information were weaved in such a way which becomes easy for people to remember and transmit across generations. Also important is the fact that everyday concern, and this is something which is another aspect that we should be talking about, because another charge on ancient Indian knowledge system is that it was very much divorced from the everyday concern. The mundane requirements of life was not the prime concern for the knowledge system in ancient India. This is something which is spoken of. But if we take the example of, say, the details contained in Bodhayan Sutra and several other Vedic treatises of the making of the Havan Kund or the sacrificial pit, then that itself contains a lot of mathematics and intricate aspects of mathematics. Pythagoras theorem is claimed to have been something which with ancient Indians were aware of without actually naming it as such, but they did understand that what is the different dimensions of say a perimeter or a triangle, and how different sides are proportionate to each other, how if we don't have exact information about one side but we have information about the other two sides' length, then how the third side can be worked out to a fair degree of exactitude, which is what Pythagoras theorem is all about. So one needs to have some kind of a sympathetic approach to the information contained therein. And the disjunction that we were talking of in the sense that the Shastric tradition of ancient India is divorced from the Shilp, which is doing things by hand, karigari, and Shastra is something which is say all encoded in Sanskrit, and it is high philosophy and knowledge that we regard as true knowledge, and the pragmatic part of it, the usable part of it, the technology part of it is reduced to a second grade kind of Shilpa tradition, which is not quite able to come to the level of Shastric tradition, which is more theoretical. So this is something which is spoken of about ancient India. At a particular point of time, we did get into this kind of artificiality of creating Shastric tradition and putting it at a level which is higher than the Shilpa tradition, and the gap, the disjunction between the two became very apparent. This is something which particularly happened in the post-Gupta period, where the adjectives and the decorative part, ornamental part of language became so heavy that it completely lost sight of its functionality, and also the fact that everyday life concern ceased to keep the Shastric tradition informed of the changes and the elaborations. Similarly, empirical traditions could not quite enter into these discourses in order to make it more dynamic and close to the everyday concern. Now, in that respect, we need to understand the points where such disjunctions happened, and there is some kind of a corrective which is required in order to bridge that gap even in the present times, in case such approaches and attitudes survive in our generation to some extent, where we are led into thinking that theoretical knowledge is something which is more rewarding as compared to the application part of it. So there is a lesson there to be had from ancient Indian knowledge systems also, which initially felt so free to venture into domains beyond a particularly identified set of knowledge systems, say medicine, grammar, mathematics, literature, and so forth. Whereas subsequently this disjunction becomes very apparent, that is Shastra and Shilp. There are some very interesting studies which try to locate the very nuanced astronomical or celestial understanding which are actually contained in the folklores and some very native devices. For instance, there is a device by the name of Rapalagai. This is a Malayalam word, Rapalagai. So there are two strings alongside a wooden equipment which is used by the fishermen who venture into the high seas. And what this device was actually used for is to make some kind of calculation related to latitude, because locating one's position in the high seas is something which was not known to the world around the time that we are talking of in this case. We are talking of say 16th century, around the time when Vasco da Gama came to India, and he's supposed to have come, an Indian sailor is supposed to have aided him while navigating through the high seas across the Arabian Sea. And we have a reference to this device. Ethnographic studies are carried out in order to know as to what could be the possible calculations that they did. And even as late as 18th century European tradition, I am saying, Newton is said to have said in the parliament, in the British parliament, that the world did not know about a satisfactory way and means to work out the actual latitude around that time. And we have some devices which are actually working it out, and the location in the C, in the high C, where the reference point cannot be the previously cited land, because we are operating in high seas. So that is something at play in Indian conditions. And these aspects, these we can say tidbits about the traditional knowledge systems which married the everyday concern with some very nuanced, sophisticated theoretical calculations, and made it quite simple. And Rapanagai is one device through which this aptitude can be made evident. So there are several other such instances where it might not carry the pretense of being a very sophisticated, high level knowledge which is contained in it, or it might not, as I said, it might not carry that pretense. Nevertheless, it is a device, or it satisfactorily works out or satisfies the functional aspect of everyday life and the work that it is supposed to be doing. And these application part of knowledge systems in ancient Indian tradition or in the Indian historical tradition needs to be decoded. And for that we have seen through our presentations in the last couple of interactions that I had with you, that we need to be a little bit more sensitive, and also we need to be aware of the fact that it is the concern of storing that knowledge or information in the oral tradition, in the oral format, which was also a compulsion, and therefore the literary paddings and extraneous concerns which are part of this knowledge system should not be brushed aside as something which is very irrational or uncalled for, and something which is which makes it unscientific. Rather, we need to look at the underlying line and the underlying theme beneath that, and once we do that, we perhaps can reveal the actual intent and content of these treatises in ancient India.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us about the second part of transdisciplinary knowledge systems. And of course, it has been a wonderful transition, say, from part 1 to 2, and sir has also shared us very relevant information, bits of information with us. And just briefly like to ask you, sir, if we could, so I asked you in the previous lecture also, but if you could suggest any other books or titles or any other relevant sources of information which our students could consult, also pertaining to today's lecture in particular.
Yeah, it is one can say it is an emerging area, therefore one particular book might not suffice, because one has to grapple with several examples here. But there is a series in Indian Culture and Civilization. I think it is edited by D.P. Chattopadhyay, and which talks of the science, philosophy, and history in the ancient civilization. And there the relevant units, the relevant volumes can be made use of, and it is chronologically arranged also, so one can work out the period for which we want a particular information and the knowledge tradition. So it is basically a presentation of Indian knowledge system and culture in transdisciplinary way, the way actually it existed. So we have several articles in these in this volume, the set of volumes, and they all talk of one particular theme and one particular knowledge system. So from philosophy, from agronomy, from economy, from astronomy. So all this information for a particular period is clubbed together in one place, and if we look at it from that perspective, the ancient wisdom gets revealed in a rather fascinating way.
Absolutely, sir. We've come to the close of our time, but briefly a question that the idea of Indian knowledge systems, is a lot of research being conducted in the field, or is it a field that is yet to be explored by too many people in that sense?
I did touch upon this while talking about different approaches, and what I need to emphasize here is that instead of brushing aside the ancient Indian knowledge systems as irrational or something which is devoid of worldly concerns and so forth, which is a tendency amongst quite a few scholars, one needs to be a little bit more sensitive. And we have hinted at the concerns, because we are talking of a different time altogether. That was a time when printing press was not there.
Definitely.
That was a time when we did not have the luxury of, say, computers or the computational devices that we have today. Now, in those circumstances, if one is talking of, say, distance from here to the sun, or locating one's position in the high seas, then under what cultural circumstances, with what devices that you have, archaic devices that you have to work it out.
Absolutely, sir.
And in that context, the knowledge is stored in a different way. And the compulsion of putting the knowledge in oral tradition is something for which I did give a couple of examples from some of the surviving traditions. The Hindi format of Pahada, or the regional formats of Pahada, which is actually the numerical tables. So they all go on to emphasize this point that there were several other concerns. That's where the extraneous entries of, say, literary metaphors or synonyms,
right,
what we generally term as literary
right. So we can say that there's of course a lot more than has already been explored.
Yes.
So there's a lot more to be explored in that area.
To be
right. Of course, sir, makes for a very interesting discussion. So we could probably have it also discuss it at the end of our next lecture also. So with this, I'd like to take your leave, friends, and thank you so much for being here, sir. Thank you, friends, and have a great day.